It's Ash from Super Videos, back for another video for The Walking Dead's comic book series. In this video, we're going to be talking about Negan's future. So, obviously, spoiler alert if you're not caught up with the latest issue of The Walking Dead. And also, if you're not caught up with the latest issue of Negan's backstory, here's Negan Part 15. You may not want to watch this video because it may spoil some things for you. Now, before we get started with this whole topic, I want to let you know that my review for Here's Negan Part 15 is up. So it's been uploaded already. You can go and check it out. And obviously, I'm gonna talk a lot about Negan. So I'm gonna refer to some points in the Here's Negan backstory as well. So you might want to go watch my reviews for all of the chapters of Here's Negan, because I'm gonna refer to some of those moments from my review as well. So what this topic really is us talking about Negan and, you know, his whole story and where I think it's heading and why I disagree with where it's heading. So to begin, let's start with Negan's first introduction. So when Negan was first introduced in the comic book series, he was one of the baddest villains because he showed up, he beat one of the beloved characters to death brutally with a baseball bat named Lucille, and after that we were basically in Negan's world, and everything the protagonist of the story, Rick Grimes, did was following Negan's orders and doing what he wants. But Negan is very charismatic and very funny, and he has a lot of elements that makes him a very interesting character. And I think that's one of the main reasons why fans enjoy Negan so much, and they fell in love with his character, even though he's a villain and he beat one of our fan favorites to death. But then going from there, we obviously had the whole altercation, the whole war with Negan and the Saviors. And once the war ended, we had Rick taking Negan and throwing him in jail rather than killing him, to basically show that he's very different than Negan, and that he's going to show Negan that they can change, that they can rebuild and everything, and they can be better than they were before. And obviously from there, Negan in his jail cell connected with Rick Grimes, and those two characters, as much as they hated each other, or from Rick's perspective at least, Rick hated Negan, but they ended up actually, you know, getting to know each other a little bit. Rick even asked Negan for advice. So we kind of saw that relationship build up, and we saw this type of respect built between Negan and Rick. Obviously, Negan respected Rick even before the war itself and during the war, but I think once he was in jail, he kind of respected Rick a lot more, knowing that, you know, Rick is basically rebuilding and everything, which kind of validated why Rick didn't kill Negan and just threw him in jail. But leaving that aside, obviously we did see that respect and relationship being built, and then once Negan got out of jail, we did see he was always trying to show Rick that he had changed and trying to make Rick trust him. And at this point, I would say Rick does respect Negan to a degree. And of course, there was even moments where Negan saved Rick Grimes from dying. And even at the end, during the last issue, we had him step up and basically teach the Saviors a lesson. Tell them that they need to work with Rick Grimes and they need to trust Rick Grimes. They need to respect Rick Grimes. And I think that Robert Kirkman has gone out of his way to make us feel connected to Negan and try to humanize Negan to an extent. And, you know, more and more it seems like where Robert Kirkman is going with Negan's future is to make him somewhat of a good character, someone who has redeemed himself. Although I can definitely say, at least for me, Negan will never be redeemed. He'll always be the villain. He'll always be the person who beat Glenn to death. But just to go back to my previous point, we see that Robert Kirkman is trying to redeem Negan and make us like Negan as a good character, as a good person, rather than as the villain. Now, obviously there could be something there that, you know, we don't know yet. He could be throwing something at us that is unexpected, that we didn't see coming, and he could make Negan, you know, do things that make him the bad guy again. So we have to wait and see where it goes. But it seems like, from my point of view, that's where it's heading, where Robert Kirkman is trying to make Negan a good person and someone who has changed. So why do I disagree with this? Why do I think it's not a good idea for us to like Negan as a good guy, for Negan to change and be a good guy? So, for me, I think Negan is a great villain. He is arguably the greatest villain we've ever seen in the Walking Dead series. It's his kind of attitude towards life that makes him a bit different than, some of the other villains we've seen. So Negan will always be a villain to me. He will never be a good guy. To be honest, I don't want Negan to be a good guy. I like Negan because he's a villain. I like Negan being a villain. So if they go ahead and turn him into a good guy, I can't say that I'm going to be happy, because to me, he will always be a villain. And I might not feel connected to Negan, and I might not be invested in his character or interested in his character anymore if they end up doing that and making him a good guy. So now to add to this, I'm gonna refer to Here's Negan, Negan's backstory. So to recap a little bit, when Negan is introduced in the comic book series, he's a villain. He's the baddest villain we've ever seen. He's brutal, and he makes the governor look like nothing in comparison. But within a period of time, within 2 years, when he's in jail, he changes. He turns into a good guy, and he tries to be good. He tries to do good things. But then, if we look at Here's Negan, we're first introduced to Negan just being a regular guy. Maybe his charismatic nature and his foul mouth is not different than the Negan from the comic book, but he's just a regular guy. He's not a bad person. He's a regular human being, just like everybody else, just like Rick before the apocalypse, in terms of, who he is as a person. But once the apocalypse hits and shit hits the fans, he changes a little bit. He feels no remorse towards the decisions he makes, which ends up with others around him dying. He feels no sympathy towards others, most people, and then he goes and beats someone to death brutally with a baseball bat, and he feels no remorse for that action, and he kind of brags about it as well. So within a short amount of time in the Here's Negan comic book series, he changes and turns into a bad guy. But in reverse, he switches back to being a good guy. Now obviously that takes a bit more time, but I just don't buy it. I just don't buy into the whole thing that he's changed, because if someone can turn into a bad guy this quickly, they're not gonna turn into a good guy, no matter how long it takes them, because they're bad in nature. And it's gonna be very difficult to change someone like that, and a 2-year time in jail is not gonna do that. And because of that, I feel this story is a bit forced in terms of making him a good guy. And like I said, someone who brutally murders someone and feels no remorse, obviously I'm talking about the Here's Negan story, he's not going to change back into just an ordinary good guy anymore. So that's basically it for my opinions and thoughts about Negan's future. And just to go back to what I said before, if they end up making Negan a good guy, I will say I'm going to be a bit disappointed. Not only because it's predictable, because they've been building it up, but also because I want Negan as a villain. I don't want them to turn him into a good guy. Now, it's perfectly fine for them to have him be somewhat of a character where he's in the gray area. He's not very good, he's not very bad. I'm gonna be perfectly fine with that. He makes decisions that are questionable, but he also makes decisions that are perfectly valid and perfectly human. But, if they end up making him a complete good guy, I don't think that I'm gonna be happy about that. But at the same time, I don't want them to make him a complete bad guy again and go back to that story either. I want them to do something with him where he is not necessarily a bad guy, but he's not necessarily a good guy. So he's somewhere in between. So they could basically make him be somewhat in the gray area where I just described. But I want to know everyone's opinions about Negan in the comic book series. What do you think about Negan? Where do you think his story is heading? And how do you think he will change coming up? And whether you actually agree with his transformation and making him a good guy, or if you disagree with it, and why you feel that way. That's it for this video. See you next time for another super video.